Okay, so I want to say a big thank you to Neal for hosting this for us, and a very good name for a shop to be hosting this particular book as well. So I know all of you probably know Lloyd, or at least some better than others. The artist formerly known as John Cedars. So you've probably been following him for a while. Activist, Reluctant Apostate, blogger, YouTuber, and now an author. I discovered Lloyd a year or two ago, I think, through his website, JW Survey, and it was through the coverage of the Royal Commission in Australia that made me become an activist myself. It was probably the first apostate site I read, and it's still one of the first that I recommend when people are looking for answers. Basically, it was the reasoned approach that Lloyd has that struck a chord with me, and I know he's helped lots of people come to their own realisations and understanding of the issues with the Watchtower organisation. So this book has been eagerly awaited. I guess it's been a lifetime in the making, but you started in 2012 when you were officially still a witness, which is interesting, and it landed in your hands physically a week ago, days ago, literally days ago, and he's come all the way from Croatia to see us today. So what we're going to do is, after I've stopped gabbing, Mark is going to have a short interview with Lloyd. We'll hopefully address some questions that people have got. Then Lloyd is going to read a short piece. Then we'll have a Q&A where we can hopefully any residual comments. So I'll just hand over to you for the interview. Okay.
Okay, Lloyd, thank you very much for coming here. So for anyone who isn't familiar with your work, could you just give us a brief introduction as to who you are and about the work that you're doing?
Okay, I'm Lloyd Evans. I used to be a Jehovah's Witness, and I started waking up really when I was about 20, but for various reasons, mostly the death of my mother, I felt like I needed to stay a Jehovah's Witness even though I had doubts. So when you're a Jehovah's Witness and you lose someone, you're really told, well, that person isn't quite dead. You're going to see them again in the future, provided you stay as close to the centre of our organisation as possible. So that meant that I kind of threw all of my doubts into the long grass. And it was only when a very unexpected series of events occurred after moving to Croatia that I just started to wake up. Well, the main reason was that I was unplugged from the constant indoctrination. I was no longer going to the meetings twice a week, so it really enabled me to take a step back and think, what do I believe? And from there, things just kind of mushroomed, and I started writing about what I was thinking and what my research was, and people found it interesting, and then I set up a YouTube channel, and things went from there really. So as of now, I enjoy writing about the organisation, and I feel that by opening the discourse on this and other cults, it's enabling people to make that journey themselves.
Right. You're here for the signing of your book, The Reluctant Apostate. Now that documents your life as you were already in the Jehovah's Witnesses and as we're transitioning out. So can you give us an overview of the contents of the book and what you hope this book will accomplish?
Okay, so when I first started writing it, I wanted to write a memoir and kind of document the process of leaving, but I also wanted to kind of take the reader on a whistle-stop tour of the organisation and its history, and I thought what would be good is if I could weave the two together, so that rather than reading my story and then all of the nitty-gritty about Watchtower, you're kind of reading both at the same time. They kind of intersect, and that was the approach I took, and I started writing the first 4 or 5 chapters in late 2012, early 2013, and then I wrote the last 2 chapters maybe a year ago, and then in August this year, I thought, I've got to finish this book. And I thought maybe I can do it in 40,000 words, and 40,000 words I could maybe write in a month. So I thought if I could probably finish it just in August. And then 3.5 months later, finally it gets finished. So it's been a big journey, and I wrote it primarily for an audience of non-witnesses. So I've tried to write it with the non-witness in mind, but with a view to the fact that there will probably be at some point either ex-witnesses or witnesses reading it too.
Right, okay. So you were in the Jehovah's Witnesses for a number of years, and then you left. I think you were an elder, is that right?
That's right, yeah. Just briefly for a year.
Yeah.
And in that year, all of my illusions of what it means to be an elder were completely shattered. I mean,
This is a church leader, isn't it?
Yeah, so every congregation has maybe a number of elders. The minimum is 3 for a congregation, and you can have anything up to, I don't know, I've been in a congregation with 18 elders before.
Yeah.
And the idea is that collectively they run the congregation, and they shepherd the flock, as it were. So they provide pastoral care, and they also intervene if there is a judicial issue, if someone contravenes Watchtower's requirements. So I was one of those for a year. To this day, I'm grateful that I was never called upon to act in a judicial way. I was never asked to be on a judicial committee or disfellowship anybody. But even though I dodged that bullet, it was still very obvious to me that I was dealing with not spirit-appointed men, but with just ordinary politics that you would see in any church.
Of course, having left, that means that has effects on you, because your family, your friends, everybody who you're associated with now treat you differently.
That's right. That's also documented in the book. I talk about the reaction of my father, who is an elder, and he made it very clear from the beginning. In fact, even before, well before I left, in fact, he said that it would kill him to shun me, but he would do it if that's what Watchtower wanted him to do. And he's been true to it, and he still hasn't met, you guys all saw Jessica very briefly, he still hasn't met his granddaughter, and he hasn't met her purely because he objects to the fact that myself and Deanna are no longer witnesses.
So would you say that the book is as much to educate those outside the faith, I think you mentioned that, as well as those who are already inside and are having doubts?
Definitely. It's a very, very big challenge to write to multiple audiences, to write primarily with none or never JWs in mind,
Yeah.
and also to write with JWs and ex-JWs in mind. But I feel as though, so far the feedback I'm getting is that, you know, I've more or less cracked it. And one thing I have done is include pages every now and then that are directly speaking to witnesses, and I call them 4 witnesses boxes. And in those I will deal with specific subjects such as blood transfusions or disfellowshipping, and I'll actually argue from the Bible why the witness view on those things is wrong. So it's kind of, I feel I've done the balancing act, or at least tried
to. That would probably be the best way, I think, from
Yeah.
the Bible and people in that particular
That's
stage.
right. And just a little anecdote, because I haven't really had anyone to test the book on in terms of a test audience for non-JWs. And on the way here, we were staying at some accommodation in High Wycombe. And the funny thing is that I left the book with the host that we were staying with. And he actually told me in advance that he had no interest in religion and had no interest in politics. But I wanted to give him a book because he'd been very generous and hospitable. So I left him a copy, and a couple of days later I got a text saying, I can't put it down. So that's
what you want to hear.
giving me a clue that perhaps it's readable for the non-JW.
Okay, so this is a question I asked Lydia when I interviewed her. If there's anybody watching this interview who is a JW, who's in your organization, watching you, what would you say to them right now?
I would say there's one question that you need to ask yourself, and that is, how much do I care about truth? If you passionately care about truth, then you should want to assure yourself that what you're believing is true. And the only way you can assure yourself that what you're believing is true is to do research. And when I say research, I mean research in all sources. See what all sides have to say. Because if your beliefs are really true, they will stand up to the highest possible scrutiny. But it may just be that, like with many religions, when the beliefs are actually scrutinised, there are flaws, and you will only find that out if you do research.
Right. Lloyd, thank you very much for talking to us, and good luck with the book.
Thank you very much. I must have been about 7 years old when one day my teacher told all the children in my class to colour in some posters to advertise the school's Christmas fair. Christmas is just one in a long list of celebrations that witnesses do not observe. And there's the box explaining to a witness about Christmas. They consider it a pagan celebration that has nothing to do with Christ and is characterised by ungodly conduct. New Year's celebrations are marked by debauched behaviour and are thus to be similarly avoided. I was not sure what all the reasons were as a young lad, but I did feel strongly that colouring in a Christmas poster would be very wrong and something my parents would be very displeased about. I mustered up the courage and calmly approached my teacher, informing her that I could not colour in the poster because it was against my religion. This news did not go down well. "Lloyd doesn't want to help the school," my teacher screeched in front of my classmates. If the public reproof were not bad enough, there was further humiliation to follow. My teacher decided to punish me by sending me to stand alone in the middle of the school courtyard in the cold, so that all the teachers and children could learn of my wickedness in disobeying her instructions. My school was, and still is, in a kind of rectangular donut shape with the courtyard in the middle. When standing in that central spot, one feels extremely conspicuous. I cannot remember for how long I stood there or how cold it was. It must have been winter by necessity, but I do not remember it being a remotely enjoyable experience. When I told my parents of this, they were mortified and came to the school demanding a meeting with my teacher. I was not present for their discussion, so I cannot tell you whether any apologies were forthcoming. I can only remember the incident itself and how embarrassing and unfair it all felt at the time. As to whose fault the whole thing was, I'm now able to view the matter a little more objectively. Yes, my teacher showed a lack of sensitivity and tolerance toward a pupil of a religious minority, and even if she felt her anger was justified, no child should be punished in that way, least of all for conscientious reasons. Nonetheless, this would never have happened in the first place if my parents had not been conditioned into training their child to refuse to do something as harmless as colour in a school Christmas poster. My punishment for taking a stand on a matter of faith was to have a profound effect on me. The experience made me feel even more different than I already was, and served to reinforce the persecution complex and siege mentality that is instilled in all witnesses from childhood. I now had proof that the world was out to get me. But my parents had not finished locking horns with this particular teacher. One evening at the dinner table, not long after the Christmas poster incident, they asked me what I'd learned at school that day. I told them I'd learned about how fish once crawled out of the sea to become dinosaurs. I'm sure this would not have precisely described what we had been taught, but it was certainly the way I had understood it. Mum and Dad looked at each other aghast. I could tell they were extremely disturbed by what I had just said. They asked me to repeat myself. Their ears had not deceived them. To their horror, their young boy had been led astray with a lesson in the basic principles of evolution, a field of science that witnesses reject entirely, believing that it serves the purposes of Satan. Once again, my parents got in the car and headed to the school to have strong words with the teacher who, not content with persecuting young Lloyd over his beliefs, was now trying to fill his head with dangerous heretical nonsense about walking fish. When they returned, they told me they had left her with a copy of Life, How Did It Get Here by Evolution or by Creation. The creation book, as it is known by witnesses, presents Watchtower's arguments against evolution, in large part through use of some appalling misquotes that have since been ruthlessly exposed. In its concluding chapter, it asserts, "The theory of evolution is contrary to reality. Yes, effectively a lie." If my parents had misgivings about my teacher's techniques, it could be suggested their own teaching methods were not above scrutiny. One evening, Dad decided to spice up our family study session by including an emergency drill for Armageddon. The telephone rang and he picked up the receiver to have what we later discovered was a feigned conversation with one of our congregation elders. It was not too difficult to make the phone ring by itself. When Dad put the receiver back down, he had a panicked look on his face. He told us the Great Tribulation, or prelude to Armageddon, had begun. Our congregation was gathering at the Kingdom Hall so that we could all drive in convoy to Macclesfield Forest, where we were to evade capture and persecution. The nations of the UN beast had finally turned on God's people, and they were coming to get us. I felt a rush of adrenaline, having suddenly found myself thrust into a real-life approximation of the final scenes from The Sound of Music. To her credit, my younger sister was sceptical from the outset and did not believe this really was the end of the world. I, on the other hand, fell for it hook, line and sinker. After scrambling upstairs to my room, I began stuffing a backpack with all manner of essential equipment, including binoculars, a compass, a flashlight and a penknife. I was heavily into Enid Blyton books at the time. I was especially keen to include my Bible in this makeshift survival toolkit, along with a bright red book titled Revelation, Its Grand Climax at Hand. The Revelation book was a Watchtower publication that had only just been released. At that time it was being enthusiastically studied and distributed by all witnesses globally. Brimming with colourful and disturbing artwork, it explained how the Bible prophecies of Revelation, swarms of locusts, heavenly trumpet blasts, burning mountains crashing into the sea, etc., mostly described symbolic events that took place in the early 20th century, specifically concerning the exploits of the early witnesses, or Bible students as they were then known. A typical passage reads, "The global congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses has shared in many conquests under the guidance of its conquering king. Outstandingly, he protected these Bible students from annihilation in 1918, when they themselves were conquered temporarily by Satan's political organization." Despite such unabashed eccentricity, the Revelation book was greeted with excitement by witnesses for two main reasons. Firstly, it reminded them that they were God's chosen people, with a crucial role to play in the outworking of his purposes. Secondly, like most Watchtower publications, it made Armageddon imminent. With the majority of pre-apocalyptic prophecies having been neatly fulfilled by the early witnesses in the first few decades of the 20th century, the arrival of God's day of wrath was a mere formality that could strike the planet at any moment. I was too young to understand all the technicalities, but I thought the book might come in handy as a rough field guide to the apocalypse that now seemed to be unfolding before me. With my rucksack packed, I scurried downstairs, expecting my family to be already waiting for me in the car with the engine running, ready to whisk me away to exile in Macclesfield Forest. You can only imagine how foolish and deflated I felt on realising from the smirks on Mum and Dad's faces that it was all just a hoax. There was no Great Tribulation or Armageddon unfolding. The brothers were not waiting for us at the Kingdom Hall. It was only a drill. That's reading. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Lydia.
You said that your younger sister, was it, was kind of naturally sceptical. Is she a witness now, or what's her?
I must be careful not to speak for her because we're not in contact at the moment. I can only tell you that as far as I'm aware, she hasn't disavowed being a witness, but I'm not aware of her going to meetings at the moment. I could be wrong, but yeah, we're not. Unfortunately, I think largely because of our upbringing, we don't have a relationship at the moment, as I think is probably the case in lots of.
I find that because half of mine are witness and half aren't.
Yeah.
But I think just that fracture affects all the relationships.
Yeah.
It is very difficult to.
And I think it's so pervasive as well that it reaches into family relationships, whether there is disfellowshipping or not, because the watchtower mentality is, oh well, you should avoid bad association. So Derek and I were talking before about our encounter at the convention, and at the time I'd been trained to think of him as bad association, because he wasn't, he was trying very hard to kind of depart from what was required of him, and at the time I was trying to do the opposite. So the mentality you're given as a witness is, keep them at arm's length. So even if it's not full shunning, it still does have an impact on family relationships. That shouldn't have been an issue for you and me, should it? What?
Sure, it is what it was, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah. Your opinion of the governing body, Lloyd. Do you think that they are deluded? That they are faithful men going in a certain direction? Or do you think they're just power crazed and trying to take this publishing company into a specific direction? What's your opinion on that?
I subscribe to what Franz said about them, that they're victims of victims. I think that the human brain is so complicated that it's possible that there is an element of cynicism in the way they behave. It wouldn't surprise me if there were. But I think at the same time, I look at what they're saying and I listen to them talking, and I see deluded people who, at least at some level, believe what they're saying. I think they've bought into the Watchtower theology, and I think they had to in order to get to where they are. I think that the Watchtower hierarchy is set up to reward people who don't ask questions, who just accept everything at face value, and speed them up the ladder as quickly as possible, which is kind of, the way I describe it, is a reverse evolution. Because if you're doing that, you're not picking good leaders. You're picking the runts over the leaders. You're elevating those that just go along with the flow, and perpetuate what's gone on before. And I think that's exactly what we see with the governing body. There could be an element of cynicism, but I think mostly they're deluded. Good question, though. Yeah.
How many people are actually Jehovah's Witnesses? I mean, I suppose in this country, globally, what are the numbers like?
So there's 8 million who are reporting. That number is a little bit deceptive because that number can include people who aren't baptized. So the 8 million is everybody who goes on the ministry on behalf of Jehovah's Witnesses, including, let's say, children who are 9 or 10 and they're waiting to get baptized. And it's also deceptive because a number of witnesses stop reporting, but they carry on believing. So they could become inactive, they could fade, they could even get disfellowshipped and still hold on to the theology, the belief that Armageddon is coming, and if they don't get back under Watchtower's umbrella, they're going to get destroyed. So it's very, very difficult to put a number on the precise number of people who are actually underneath the spell of Watchtower. But we know that at least 8 million identify as witnesses publicly in the preaching work.
If you're not disfellowshipped or disassociated, would they still count you as a witness in their numbers?
Not in the 8 million, no.
Nice.
No. Yeah, so one thing that people have tried to do, myself included, is figure out what the exit numbers are. Because you think, well, if people are getting baptized, if we know what the baptism numbers are, and we know what the average numbers are for all of the different years, if we do a bit of calculation and we take off the number who are baptized, surely we can see how many people are leaving. But the problem is, there's a number of variables, such as people getting disfellowshipped and then just they get reactivated and they start preaching again. They're not going to get baptized a second time or a third time or a fourth time. So it's very difficult to know exactly how many are leaving. But yeah.
Which is what they want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
3, 4, 5 years ago, you were a devout Christian. You were following the rules of the Bible. You were a true believer. You've gone from that to being an atheist. How quick was that transformation? And what does that mean to your belief system now, if there is any belief system?
Yeah. So that's a good question. began when I started out on the journey. I write in my book, I liked the idea that I was wrong about Watchtower, but surely I was right all along. I just happened to have been born into the correct overall religion of Christianity, you know, and I hoped I could take for granted that my Christian faith was bulletproof, but I just personally couldn't help applying the same critical thinking skills that I'd already applied to Watchtower, to Christianity, and indeed religion in general. And I would suppose the last thing that went, Deanna and I joke about this, usually it's praying at meal times. Most witnesses can't wait to stop praying before every meal, but I was doing that probably a year or even 2 years after I stopped attending meetings. We'd go to McDonald's and thank you for this, Big Mac. I just liked the idea of saying thank you to someone or something. But I think what really did it for me was watching videos on YouTube, particularly Christopher Hitchens, and the way he just eviscerates the whole project of faith and what faith means, and the fact that essentially it's believing things without having evidence. And if you can believe something without having evidence, you can actually be in any religion. So yeah, that's what did it really.
Would you perhaps describe other religions as cults, or do you feel like maybe that's doing a disservice to the sort of more toxic effects of Watchtower and Jehovah's Witness?
I love that question because I've dealt with that in the book, and the I should say, spoiler alert, I do think all religions are cults, but I explain in the book why that is so, and I try to explain in a respectful way. I think cult is a problematic word because it immediately puts people on the defensive. It's a pejorative, it's viewed as an insult. Nobody likes being insulted, nobody likes being told you're in a cult, and it closes up the discourse. If you approach a cult victim and say you're in a cult, they're only going to say no, I'm not, and assume that you're bigoted. So it's a troubling word. And another thing that's troubling about it is, if I was to point at someone and say you're a criminal, if they've been convicted in a court of law as a criminal, then I can say that because they are, but there is no court that decides what a cult is. So whenever I say this is a cult, I'm speaking purely from my own opinion. But I believe that when you look at the word cult and you try to define it, my personal definition of a cult is any group or movement that does harm. And then you say, well, what about the Church of England? Surely that's not doing any harm. You know, teas and coffees on a Saturday, you know, finding funds to fix the church spire, how can that be doing anyone any harm? And I just argue, well, it's just not true. And if you're teaching children something that isn't true, you're doing them harm. You're impairing their development intellectually. It's far better to give them a blank canvas and let them explore the universe at their own pace.
Just for the sake of devil's advocate, where does Santa fit into that? Seeing as it's Christmas time.
I can't. I would never dream of telling people what to do with Santa Claus.
Once they go to school, believe me, you have no control.
You have no, yeah, exactly. Well, put it this way, I wouldn't be doing what my parents did and driving into the school if I found out they'd said, oh, Santa Claus is coming to the Christmas fair. You know, I wouldn't be. I just personally, I think probably because I was lied to so much as a child, they were well-meaning lies, but they were still lies. I just struggle to say anything to my child that she can later say, you told me something that's not true. I would rather say, it's Christmas and this is the legend and these gifts are from Mummy and Daddy, but let's pretend they're from Santa Claus. I think pretend is a fantastic word, because then you're immediately appealing to the child's imagination, and they have that in abundance anyway. Let's pretend it's from Santa, you know, and then you're not lying to them, you know, you're just appealing to their imagination.
They have a lot of cognitive dissonance because my kids can see the presents.
Yeah.
They see them arrive from Amazon in a box. It's like, oh, it's Santa for So, like, because I had the same issues as you. I didn't want to say this is. So my kids didn't know anything about it until they went to school. You know, when she works it out,
Yeah.
I'll probably.
I also remember my mum telling me that because she was raised not as a witness, she found the witnesses later on in life, and she always used to say that it devastated her when she found out that her parents had been lying to her. And I just think, well, there's a lesson from my own family. I'm not going to judge other families, it's entirely up to them, but I'd rather take those lessons and do something with them. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, Lydia.
Sorry, Ian. One more. I just wanted, because I know your dad doesn't talk to you, and that's not at all. Like, you have no communication.
It's well, not at all would be like if he was dead. I mean, I can get stuff through to him, and every now and then he'll acknowledge what I've said.
Oh, okay.
So that's better than him being dead, I suppose. Yeah. But that's all it is. It's just it's basically my constant efforts to reach out to him and make him a part of my life being spurned. That's what essentially.
Do you know what he thinks about you being an apostate? Because I know my mum. Yeah. When she finds out, I know what she thinks an apostate is, and I know how that affects her.
I honestly, I can only imagine. The funny thing is I don't mind saying this on camera. I did drop off a book when I was on my way through from Wales.
Oh, really?
And I put a copy on his doorstep. I would really. I've no idea what that does to a father when that kind of thing. I guess it's kind of unprecedented for a son to not only leave but to also become an apostate and also write a book about being an apostate. Yeah. So if I were the father in that situation, I'd just be fascinated to know what he's got to say, even if I didn't disclose that I'd read the book. So we'll see. We'll see what it does. Yeah.
What do you think will happen to Watchtower as opposed to what you hope will happen to it?
Yeah. That's a good question. I hope it I hope it goes bankrupt. And the interesting thing is that when you look at the kind of the financial state of affairs, there are clues, I believe, that all is not well in terms of its finances. It's scaling things down, reducing the number of branches. I actually produce a graph in here of the reduction in printing, which I find quite interesting, because as we all know, the magazines now they're wafer thin, and I think the Watchtower empire is kind of trying to shrink at a stage that isn't too noticeable to ordinary witnesses, but it's still.
That has something to do with stuff being digital.
Yeah, that is definitely a factor. I'm only taking that as one element in a number of different elements, which I deal. What I do is I talk about the history. I go through Russell, Rutherford, and right through to the present, and then I talk a little bit about the future, and I talk about some of the clues. You know, the pattern of evidence is one expression I've heard creationists use. But I say at the end that I think that there will always be Jehovah's Witnesses, because you cannot, as hard as you try, you can't defeat religions themselves, because all it takes to have a religion is one or two people believing something. So there will always be, if there are still Bible students following Russell now in 2016, you can bet that there will be Jehovah's Witnesses 100, 200, 300 years from now. But I question whether the Watchtower Society is set up to weather the next few decades of the digital age. It's already fared so badly just in the last 15, 20 years, so that's how I feel on that.
So the generation will overlap and overlap.
Keep overlapping. Yeah, Neil.
Question on slightly different tack. Keep out of raising awareness of climate change. So, what's the Jehovah's Witness point of view on climate change? Because it is the number one issue.
Yeah.
Anything that really matters in the world.
Yeah.
Right now. So, what is their stance?
And it should be the number one thing. This is Spaceship Earth, and it's in our interests to keep it functioning as a planet that sustains not only human life but all life. But the problem with the Jehovah's Witness theology and mindset is that Satan's system's doomed anyway, and the only way that the planet can get sorted out is if billions of non-Jehovah's Witnesses are slaughtered at Armageddon. and the earth is repopulated only with Jehovah's Witnesses, and then Jehovah God and Jesus Christ will manage the planet in such a way that it can overcome those problems. And that's, I would say, the official Watchtower line on climate change. That they're creationists. They think Sky Daddy's going to swoop down and fix everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Needs everyone in this plot.
Yeah.
Did you go through a sort of the sort of standard stages of grief process in leaving? I mean, do you still find yourself angry at the delusion that you laboured under, or more forgiving of yourself because you couldn't help it? You were surrounded by disinformation.
Yeah, I think you go through with me personally, I think you go through a phase of absolutely very raw, visceral anger that you feel has to be directed somewhere, and you see some ex-JWs kind of directing it towards each other almost, rather than Watchtower. And I, for a period, for the first couple of years of my activism, I really genuinely felt a catharsis in writing articles and doing videos. And now I feel as though the cathartic element of my activism is kind of waning. I feel as though I've more or less done that now. And everything I do now is just purely I want to put stuff out there to help people in the future, to kind of carry things on. It's no longer healing me, in other words, to do what I'm doing. But I guess there's always going to be a fire in my belly to some degree. And I feel it every now and then when a certain story comes up that kind of touches me personally. I still have that fire to jump on JW survey. I've got to talk about this, yeah. So I think there is still, you could call it an anger, yes, because it's an indignation at the injustice of what's happening. Yeah. So, any other questions before I sign? Okay. Thank you very much.
Can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
Listening to talk.
Neal Emery, we just had a very successful event here at the Reason Coffee Shop and Bookstore, and this venue is open for anyone who wants to come and do similar events, book signings, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who's got anything, as long as it involves reasons and evidence and science, then we're open to help you out. So if you've got a book you're launching, you want to do a signing, or you want to give a talk, contact us and we'll see if we can arrange something.
Okay, and we'll put some links underneath this in the description.
Thank you.
Thank you.